All right, so for this episode of the Autistically Wired podcast, we are so pleased to have Chris Bonnello with us. Chris Bonnello is an autistic advocate, educator, and writer who is perhaps most well known for the Underdogs series, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep, that's my first novel series, and my online platform's Autism Not Weird, which is where I talk about autism from both the personal and professional perspective. Personal because obviously I'm autistic, and professional because I used to be a teacher and now, yeah, full-time speaker and advocate.
Right on. We're gonna get into all of that. Fun fact before we get started, Chris and I actually know each other. He was a mentor of mine when I was first exploring my diagnosis. I was diagnosed at 18 months, but I found out about it in my adolescence, and that was a big identity to grapple with. And Chris was really huge in helping me process that. So this is kind of a this is kind of a nice reunion for me. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Albert. Yeah, I don't think I've said yes to a podcast quite so quickly as this one because yes, Ryan's hosting a podcast and it's great to see you. Yeah, just before you start recording, I've said I wouldn't go into too much detail about that. Oh, how far you've come and all the rest of it. But honestly, it is great to have seen the kind of person that you've become since we first met all those years ago.
Yeah, thank you. That means a lot. And likewise too. I mean, that continuing to develop a new book series, keeping up with all your work, especially in the times that we've been in. It's all very meaningful. Very excited to get into
Thank
all of
you.
that as well.
Okay.
So just to get started, I'd love if you tell me a little bit about your autism journey, kind of how old you were when you were diagnosed, how you responded to it, how that identity kind of came to synthesize within yourself.
Sure.
That go.
Right, well, I was first assessed for autism when I was 4 years old, but that was back in 1989. The movie Rain Man had only been out for 1 year, and so yeah, we didn't know exactly how wide-reaching the autism spectrum was. My parents had basically been told that no, he can't possibly be autistic because he doesn't have complex learning disabilities. At the age of 10, I was assessed again for, well, it wasn't quite clear what I was being assessed for, but they listed all of the traits of autism that we know and love today, and then labelled it as this is direct quotes, by the way. Christopher has a slightly odd personality because you could get away with writing that in professional documents in 1995, and it was 2011 when I was 25 uh, when I was finally told by a consultant that, yeah, Chris, you've been autistic your whole life. We just didn't know about it when you were younger. So, in terms of how I responded to it, well, it's generally accepted that the majority of autistic people, when they find out, their response is, "Oh, yeah, that explains a lot," and it's kind of really helps them to contextualize previous life experiences. And I ended up getting there. But I found out I was autistic when things weren't going especially well for me. So, whereas I saw autism as the source of my strengths and also the source of my struggles, I very much was focusing on my struggles, which, in all fairness, I would have done that with or without the knowledge of autism. So, uh, in many
Real?
ways, yeah, it's finding out I was autistic kind of planted the seeds for what would later become very much a positive. But at the time, I needed a little bit more time to process it. But well, yeah, speaking as someone who's managed to, I'm trying not to brag, but I've achieved quite a lot since opening up about being autistic, like international speaking, 6 books and counting, and 200,000 followers. But other than that, I'm just very much more at peace with myself, and it helps a hell of a lot. I'm sure you can empathize with this to suddenly realize that, oh, I'm not a failed neurotypical. I was the autistic person I was supposed to be all along. Maybe I should stop blaming
Mm.
myself for what is essentially everyone else's problem.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can even relate to the medical system kind of failing you a bit because
Mm.
imagine if you had that diagnosis and understanding earlier at 4 or 11 instead of at 25. I mean, if you look at the
Mm.
amount you were able to do after the fact, I think it speaks to the power of what that diagnosis and understanding can really do for
Mm.
you.
Oh yeah, I mean, in all fairness, it took me a fair few years after finding out I was autistic to kind of go public with the information, so to speak. It's like um, I found out I was autistic in November 2009, got the diagnosis in January 2011. I launched Autistic Not Weird in April 2015, so that was a good 4, 5, 6 years where I only told the people who I really trusted. And so once in a while, this has actually happened. I got a message from a follower saying, "Hi, Chris, I just found out I was autistic 2 weeks ago. How do I become a motivational speaker?" And yeah, you've got to admire neurodivergent people's enthusiasm and the fact that we don't do things by halves. And that's great. But my honest advice to this person was give yourself some time. You don't uh, you don't have to launch straight into this straight away. Take some time to learn what it means for you, because the your views on autism and views on yourself this time next year might be completely different to what they are now. So there's no rush really.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how you spoke about kind of the amount of success that you've had directly succeeding your autism diagnosis and understanding. I think especially in the context of like when you or even I were growing up, autism was primarily discussed in the kind of a deficit model, the idea that it's
Mm,
disabling, it holds people back. But we're living in this kind of new uh, time frame where people are actually viewing autism in many ways as a superpower, like an asset that spurs uh,
mm.
productivity and success rather than hinders it. So I feel like I could kind of see that a bit in that person who's like, "Oh, I have autism now. Like, tell me how to be successful. This seems like
Mm.
the engine to success." So I'm
Yeah.
curious what your thoughts are on this kind of new autism as a superpower
Um,
framing that's been going on.
you know, you'd think that I'd be completely in favor of autism's superpower, and so autism's not a disability, it's a different ability. But no, I really, really don't like that. Leaving aside the fact that I'm the stepfather of a 17-year-old autistic girl with learning disabilities for whom autism really is a disability. Well, there's her autism, there's also her learning disability. As she gets older, it's becoming clear that those are kind of two different, well, it's kind of a Venn diagram inside her brain, if that makes sense. But uh, I I know that when people say autism's not a disability, it's a different ability, they're trying to uplift autistic people, but I don't see it as that kind of framing. I don't think that is autism positive. I think it's disability negative. I think by talking about
Mm.
autism, like we're not like those lesser disabled people, which I know isn't what they mean to say, but it's exactly what I hear. I think why not just be completely honest about the autistic experience and say that yes, for some of us, like for me, it isn't a disability. Well, I don't think uh, I would class it personally as a disability, but there are a couple of disabling elements there which I could spend all evening talking about. But the different ability
Okay.
thing does kind of apply to me personally, but it doesn't apply to my stepdaughter. And frankly, that does not make her lesser as a person. And there are plenty of disabled autistic advocates out there. Ask them whether they feel truly represented by autism isn't a disability, it's a different ability. Maybe the proper response to that is to recognize that for a lot of us, autism can definitely be a disability, but maybe we should just talk more positively about disabled people.
Mm. Yeah. So if if succeeding and having maybe kind of super powered professional success and pursuits. I mean, this is an autism career pathways podcast, but if that isn't necessarily the measure of success with a disability, success with autism, what alternative measures of success do you have if you're an autistic person, especially freshly diagnosed?
Mm.
What types of things should that person look for to be like, I am succeeding as an autistic person?
I think one thing that needs mentioning here is that we're often influenced by what other people's opinions of success are. In the context of autism, I sometimes wonder if some of the people who, like the person who I mentioned earlier, who some years ago messaged me saying, "How do I become a motivational speaker?" One part of that will be our own enthusiasm towards the things that we really care about talking about. But I do wonder if there is also an element of oh, I have to be inspirational now. It's like this sounds like I'm going off on a tangent, but honestly, bear with me. I once knew that this 15-year-old lad who came out as gay far, far before he was ready to do so. His and I could tell that he felt that he kind of had to because all the other people in the LGBT plus community who he knew would had come out as gay, and so they'd been thankfully quite well accepted about it, and because it was presented to him as kind of the norm, people are supposed to come out as gay. He felt almost like a moral duty to do it before he'd, like I said, had that time to reflect on it. And in a kind of parallel way, I do wonder if a lot of autistic people feel society's pressure to be inspirational, that we
Mm.
have to be what other people define as successful. When the truth is, and I say this to young people all the time, that when you're in school, success usually only looks like one thing. It's just how good your grades are. But when you're an adult, success can look like a million different things. And there's a lot of
Mm.
flexibility for what success can look like to you. And when people ask me about becoming an advocate, one of the very first bits of advice I give them is work out what you want your relationship with advocacy to be. Do you want to be on stage speaking? Do you want to write an anonymous blog? Do you want to talk to other autistic parents of autistic children and so on? Work out what, yeah, again, what success looks like for you rather than what you believe other people are expecting from your success.
I want to pivot a little bit to your website. I think there was a very
Yeah.
autisticnotweaker.com. And on there in you have in big letters this quote, which I
Mhm.
love. Human progress relies on diversity of thought. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, what did you mean by that quote? What's the message you're trying to get across there?
I'm saying that neurodiversity is not just a thing that we need to accept or tolerate or accommodate. I'm saying that neurodiversity is literally a positive part of our species. When I describe neurodiversity to children and frankly to corporate audiences as well, the analogy that came up a few years ago that I use is imagine that you've got 10 people who are stranded on a desert island and there's a storm coming in and they've got 1 hour to build themselves a shelter. But all 10 of these people have precisely the same brain. You may have presumably 10 pairs of working hands, but you're only looking at the problem from one perspective. Only you only have one angle on the problem, and you're probably only going to get one set of ideas. But let's imagine the precise same scenario where one of them is neurotypical, one of them is autistic, one of them is dyslexic, one of them is ADHD, and so on. You are suddenly looking at the problem from 10 different angles. You've got 10 different perspectives, and you've probably got 10 different methods of getting that shelter built, as long as people have the decency to listen to the people who think differently. So when I say when I say human progress relies on diversity of thoughts, and I do say progress rather than progress, and apologies to anyone who thinks that the American pronunciation is the correct way, and I apologize for telling you you're wrong, but I digress. When I say human progress relies on diversity of thought, it's not some kind of woke nonsense or whatever people call it these days. It is literally true from a biological perspective. And when I deliver teacher training, one thing I like saying is, so if you are the kind of school that says, yes, it's all very well that we have different brains, but everyone needs to learn this particular single method for multiplication, and so you don't allow your autistic students or otherwise neurodivergent students to access the learning in ways that resonate with their brain, not only are you letting down that child, you're literally stalling the advancement of the human race. So there.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it like that, it's like they shouldn't have dinged me 3 points for doing the lattice method instead of the vertical method for multiplication. Thank you. I've been waiting for this for 10 years.
Well, I'm very glad to be the one to break it to you that, yeah, your way of accessing the learning was never wrong, even if it was inconvenient.
I want to go a little bit more about the island example where
Yeah.
having diversity of thought, including neurodivergent brains, is what helps humans solve problems.
Mhm.
But I think there tends to be a kind of, even among the autistic community, kind of a narrow sense of the types of problems that autism can solve. I think specifically there's uh, a lot of people refer to a specific strand of autism called STEM autism that tends to get the
Mm.
most attention in the media. I At UCLA, I run a neurodiversity club, and the amount of times I hear people say, like, "Man, I wish I had STEM autism. Instead, I have liberal
Mm.
arts autism," or "I wish I had STEM autism, but I have
Oh dear.
writing anime fan fiction autism," or any version of that. I've heard them all.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, and this might be a bit of a preview of the professional section later, but I'm curious, how would you recommend autistic people identify which problems their brains are meant to solve? They'd be most effective in contributing to.
Well, it's a good question.
Yeah. Or how
I
did
would,
you maybe how did you figure out for yourself what problems your brain was best suited to?
um, well, a lot of it's kind of trial and error. And one thing I recommend to young people is, and I know this sounds very unautistic of me to recommend this, but yeah, try lots of new things so you can discover what strengths you actually have. Now, the reason I say this, now this comes from personal experience of having been a 13-year-old weird kid. Don't forget, wasn't autistic back then. It was just weird. Hence, website name, autistic, not weird. Very nearly called it slightly-odd-personality.com, but
It
um,
doesn't have the same ring
and
to it.
exactly, I wanted to keep it autism specific. But when I was 13, I was the weird kid with no leadership experience and only very basic social skills until the captain of my boys' brigade company, we kind of like the Boy Scouts, but there's
The
us a
British,
little bit
yeah,
older. And yeah, well, we have the Scouts over in Britain as well, except, well, we kind of sort of invented the Scouts, but let's not go down that rabbit hole.
that checks out. Yeah.
My company captain noticed that I was very good at playing the drums, so he said, I'm going to put him in charge of the marching band. And I'm very glad that he did because that helped me to realize all the uh, all the strengths relating to motivating young people and communicating with young people. Those strengths I didn't even realize I had. And 10 years later, I qualified as a primary school teacher. So being given that responsibility really did change my future. So what I say to autistic young people these days is I talk a lot about playing to your strengths. In fact, that's kind of the autistic not weird drinking game. Take a sip of water, obviously water, every time Chris says play to your strengths. And uh, yeah, what to say after that is it's all very well me saying play to your strengths, but uh, a bunch of the strengths that you will spend your lives playing to are strengths that you don't even realize you have yet. So yeah, be
Mm.
flexible in terms of trying new things because life is happier when you know what you're good at and you do what you're good at, but you got to do those different things first before you uncover those strengths. I mean, in a parallel universe, I could have said no to leading that marching band and then just not had a teaching career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting story as well because one of my favorite metaphors is the example of a wheelchair store that's at the top of a long flight of stairs, where the means for advancement or accommodation are at the top of a process that isn't actually designed for the disability. So
Mm,
sometimes in order to discover your strengths and gifts as an autistic person, you have to try a lot of new things and tolerate uncertainty and novelty, which
mm.
isn't always easy for us. But
Exactly. There is also a little bit of disclaimer that yes to everything you said, but at the same time, even though we have to confront systems that aren't built with us in mind, us doing these things and building up some resilience, is no substitute for actually trying to change those systems. I mean,
mm,
it's not enough to simply become an inspiration by battling all these systems, because I've heard it said by quite a few people that by calling an autistic person and or a disabled person an inspiration, you're actually kind of getting in the way of changing those systems and removing those barriers that would otherwise just make us access things like everyone else does and make us look a lot less inspirational
yeah,
because we wouldn't need to be. We wouldn't need to be fighters or resilience or anything. We would just have the same access to the wide world as everyone else does. So yeah, try new things and confronting your anxieties. That is great, and I'm 100% for it. With the little caveat that if those moments of bravery are basically wouldn't be requirements for other people, then we still need to change those systems.
mm. I'd love to talk a little more about you mentioned being a primary school teacher. And I know specifically you worked a lot in special education before
Mhm.
transferring overall to Autistic Not Weird. I'm curious, how was your experience like in primary school, how it was in special education, and then what ultimately led to you transitioning into the Autistic Not Weird venture?
Well, when I was a primary school teacher, I mean, I very much liked the people there. I mean, I was quite fortunate in the other staff members I worked with, and the children were awesome. But it felt, and actually for the first time, that the system was against me. Now, when I was a child in school, I fitted the mainstream system perfectly because I was very academically capable and I had very little to no sensory difficulties. So I was autistic in mainstream education, and I totally got away with it. But it wasn't until I was a teacher that I thought, wait, hang on, I've got to succeed despite my autism rather than because of my autism here. And I don't like living like that, really. So I left teaching forever for the first time and then kind of sleepwalked back into teaching. Long story, but ended up, before I knew it, uh, working as a maths teacher in a school for autistic teenagers. And yeah, I did a lot better in special education. The assumption gets made that, oh, is it because you're autistic and the students are autistic? I mean, okay, yeah, that helps, but I was also fairly good at working with neurotypical students. Thank you very much. But the thing that really helped me was just how autism specific education is built. The fact that it no longer felt like I was doing the wrong thing by trying to teach in ways that made sense to my brain. I mean, you can see me holding a Rubik's Cube right now because one of my things that I do is if I need to focus on something, I just scramble a Rubik's Cube in my hands. It really helps me to focus. And when I started doing that whilst teaching maths, the staff looked at that and thought, you know what, that's a Chris thing. He knows it helps him, so we're not going to like correct him out of something that clearly works for him just because it's an unusual thing. Whereas I'm wondering whether would have been able to get away. Even now, I'm using the phrase "get away with it" as a mainstream primary school teacher. What made me leave though was around the time I was on my second teaching career. I'd already launched Autistic Not Weird, and around 4 years ago, um, I kind of had to choose between the continuing growth of my autism advocacy, my speaking career, and all the rest of it, or continuing to be a part-time teacher. And honestly, it was time to leave and allow my autism to be well, autism advocacy to be the best that it could be.
Mhm. Do you still keep in touch with some of the schools you've worked at and the students?
I was just working with a former student of mine yesterday morning who's now 16, and today was his first maths exam.
Awesome.
So
Good
yeah,
for him.
I do still keep in contact because, well, like I said, I liked the people who I met, but yeah, sometimes you got
Mhm.
to go down new ventures, especially if those ventures have huge potential for growth and, well, satisfaction in terms of doing what you love doing.
All right. I have one more question about teaching, and then we'll get a little bit into underdogs.
Mhm.
I'm curious how it being on the other side of the academic system as a teacher, especially with autistic students. Did that give you any perspective on your career as a student, as an autistic student specifically?
Um, well, sort of. It's made me realize how kind of fortunate I was to have had the advantages that I did. Because, well, let me put it this way: sometimes people ask, Chris, what do you think is best for an autistic student? Mainstream education, special education, or home education? And you'll never guess what my response is. Well, that depends. Which autistic student? If I'd been withdrawn from mainstream education and put in an autism specific school, probably my education would have suffered. But as a teacher in special education, well, autism specific education, I was working with teenagers who had been, well, in some cases, quite literally traumatized by mainstream schools uh, who just didn't understand autistic people or saw it as saw their autistic behaviors as defiance or whatever, and they only really started to kind of recover from that once they were in an autism specific school. Likewise, I know some people who only really started to thrive once they were taken outside of the schooling system altogether and home educated. So it really does depend. But it did give me some perspective on how unfit for purpose some mainstream schools can be when it comes to autistic students, and that is not to denigrate, well, the people who I knew within mainstream education. Like I said, I think I kind of got lucky. Well, actually, I wonder how much of it is luck and how much of it is the fact that the schools that uh, wouldn't do a good job of accommodating autistic teachers and students probably wouldn't have been the kind of people who would have hired me as a teacher anyway. So maybe
Selection
it's
bias, yeah.
maybe it's a bit, yeah, selection bias is a good phrase for it.
Right. So a lot of people might know you from Underdogs,
Yeah.
which is a critically acclaimed book about a bunch of neurodivergent children. Awesome
Mhm.
concept, by the way.
Thank you.
Um, why don't you tell us maybe a spoiler light for
Mhm.
listeners who want to read it, but why don't you talk a little bit about um, the Underdogs series, the themes
Mhm.
you have in it, and then what the writing process was like for you.
Okay. So, in the Underdog series, the whole of Britain has been imprisoned in these giant walled cities, and they're being guarded by a million or so clone soldiers. But don't worry, because there are 12 people left in the abandoned countryside with small firearms and things fighting back against this army of a million. And most of them are teenagers who escaped an attack on their special school. So, autistic heroes, dyslexic heroes who have ADHD, Down syndrome, PDA, anxiety, and so on. And they're the ones who are fighting to free the rest of the population. Thank you very much. I started writing it back when there wasn't really that much autism representation in fiction. And a lot of it was very stereotyped or tokenistic, or they were people who needed saving. So I really wanted a book series with front and center neurodivergent heroes. So, well, I wrote it. Well, four times, because the Underdog series is books long, and yeah, I need to be careful what I say next because I don't know when this podcast is coming out, and I may or may not be able to give you some good news. Because, well, the bad news is first, the previous publisher went bankrupt last year due to catastrophic financial mismanagement,
Oh,
and yeah, the rights were reverted to me, and I was in between publishers, as I very euphemistically called it. But I may or may not be able to announce a bit of good news by the time this podcast comes out. I'm not going to say more than that because I think even autistic people can take a hint like that. So, but yeah, if anyone is interested in the Underdog series, please do get in touch with me through Autism Not Weird because if the series were to be republished, wink, wink, if it were to happen that
caught
way,
that.
it would be back out in a matter of, we'd be talking months rather than weeks. And also, please, please, please don't buy it from Amazon because I get zero money that way. And also, right now, the only copies of book one left on Amazon are the second-hand copies. Yeah. If you want a copy that's been signed to you or to your child, um, message me. I send books out from my house. But yeah,
Right.
that's further down the line. But yeah, that's what the Underdog series is about and why I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, first of all, and now I'm very excited about the good news. Like whenever someone says good news, like my ears just lift up like a dog's. Um, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how and why you decided to start a book. I mean, it's a big undertaking, takes a lot of executive functioning skills,
Mhm.
a lot of tolerating uncertainty, a lot of sitting alone with no human contact and writing, which actually that actually sounds pretty like a
Yeah, I only
perk.
like it. You don't need to sell it to me. But
Yeah, if you just want to get into that a little bit.
uh, yeah, well, I've loved writing ever since I was like 11 years old when I was writing Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction. And yeah, when he said I have anime and fan fiction or autism, I mean, I know so many young autistic people like that, and I enjoy just having a huge geek out about. Well, I'm not a huge anime fan. I do love Death Note and Attack on Titan and uh, uh, some of the Fate series, and I know that Avatar: Last Airbender isn't strictly speaking anime; it's anime inspired. I'm in danger of geeking out about it right now. But anyway, Sonic fan fiction. Yeah, that's how I
We'll have
started
special
when I
interest
was
section later.
Yeah. So, um, I started writing when I was 11-ish, 12-ish years old, just writing Sonic stories from my younger cousins. So I've always just loved it. But the thing that I don't mention very often about the Underdog series is that when I wrote the first draft in 2010, life wasn't going particularly well for me. But I knew that writing was something that made me very happy. So I set myself a challenge. I wanted to write a book series about the most mathematically unwinnable war possible, let's say 12 versus a million, and try and find creative ways for the good guys to stand a chance. And even if it's never been published, it still did me a world of good. It's just quite fortunate that in 2018, a publisher said yes. 2019, first book came out. So it had its own journey before publishers started taking note, and it's had quite a journey afterwards as well.
Yeah. I think there's something beautiful, I think, especially in this world that's so much about consumption and profit, that this was a book that you did started because you liked it and thought it would be good for you. I think that's a very
Well,
beautiful sentiment and something that I think a lot of folks could and should emulate.
yeah, you got to love what you do, otherwise there's no point. And it sounds like such a predictable sentence to come from an author. Oh, you've got to love what you do, but well, why else would you do it? You said it yourself. Writing a book is a huge challenge, and you've got to be serious enough about it and love it enough to commit the hours to it, especially
Mhm.
with the complete lack of promise that any I was about to use the word success, that any success would come from, but that actually leads directly into what we were saying earlier about what success looks like. Sometimes success looks like publishing four novels, one of which gets reviewed in a national newspaper, and yeah, don't mean to brag or anything. Sometimes that is what success looks like. Sometimes
Sure.
success looks like writing a bunch of Sonic stories for a younger cousin. Sometimes success looks like writing some stories when you're in a low point in your life just because it makes you happy, and those stories succeeding and making you happy. I've done all three of those things, and they've been success in their very different, unique ways.
Mm. So obviously, this is the Autistically Wired podcast with a specific focus on autistic folks in careers.
Mhm.
A lot of our listeners are autistic people, particularly on the young side, particularly with some anxieties about entering a uh, career life and job market that's challenging enough for neurotypicals, but can be
Mhm.
especially tricky for our brains to navigate. So as an autistic professional who has had success not just in a more personal abstract sense but also in more objective senses as you've discussed, um, I think we'd love to know what you've learned about navigating professional life as an autistic person, and also what advice you'd give to young autistic listeners who are anxious about adult life in career spaces.
Okay. Well, for the young people listening, I'd like to go on a very miniature rant about as adults, we don't tend to sell adulthood very well. I mean, most of you young people listening to this will have grown up being told about adulthood. You need to buck your ideas up and start working hard because one day you'll have to move out and get a job and pay your bills and so on. And well, yeah, speaking as someone who did, well, eventually move out of his parents' house and does have a job and does pay the bills, that is technically true. But if that's the only thing that anyone ever tells you about adulthood, it can make it sound very depressing. What no one really talks about is the amount of extra autonomy and choice you get as an adult. To an extent, you do get to choose what job you have, even though, yes, the recruitment system kind of sucks. I'll go to that in a moment, probably. And to an extent, you get to choose what car you drive, money dependent, again. To an extent, you get to choose where you live and what clothes you wear and all the rest of it. And um, yeah, going back to what we said about success no longer only looks like one thing. It can be um, I know hundreds, thousands of different things, and you are very often the one who gets to decide it. Of course, at the same time, let's be objective. You do need to make money as well, and yeah, I've already said that life is a lot better when you know what your strengths are and you get to play to those strengths. I would also say that sometimes we get to get jobs which really truly mean something to us. When I became a teacher, it was because of who I am as a person, what I really wanted to do with my life. Very similar to uh, what I do now as an autism advocate. I did spend a few years between teaching careers, just having a filing job at a local clinic, and that's well, I was good at it. I wouldn't say that I loved it. It was
Mm.
it was a job. It was a satisfactory job. I felt comfortable there, but it wasn't the thing that I loved. But the thing that brought joy to my life was what I did in my free time. So there's kind of two different angles to it. On the one hand, getting a job where you get to be the person who you want to be and achieve what you want to achieve in life, that is all completely great. But at the same time, that shouldn't necessarily be the goal. You don't have to do that. You know that guy who put me in charge of the marching band, my boys' brigade captain. He spent 40 years as a chemical engineer, and that was
Wow.
a job. He supported himself and his wife, who was a deputy head teacher, by the way, and his four children. And yeah, at his funeral, lots of people were there talking about all the incredible stuff that he did in his free time. No one really talked about, oh, the world has lost such a great chemical engineer. The things that brought joy to his life was what he did in his free time. He did a lot of volunteering and helped a lot of people. So, um, yeah, the wider world as an adult can look quite scary, but it is honestly quite full of opportunity. And the things that bring joy to your life don't have to be the things that you paid for. Even though I do feel like a bit of a hypocrite saying that as someone who who did get the job where I get to be who I want to be, but there are options there, is what I'm saying.
Mm. Yeah, there are options there. I think that's great for listeners to hear. And then if you could speak to a little bit, a lot of the ways that you get hired today, it requires networking and interviewing, posting on sites like LinkedIn,
Hmm.
um, like getting recommendations, having connections. And when these folks that you're engaging with and connecting with are neurotypical, um, I mean, there's a phenomenon where, like, even if autism itself isn't necessarily an abject communication disability all the time, because autistic people often can understand each other quite well, but
Hmm.
autistic and neurotypical communication doesn't always go together. So if that's something that folks struggle with, do you have any advice on how to navigate a professional world where there can be that communication mismatch?
Well, I'd say be quite clear about how you best communicate. And if you are comfortable opening up about your autism, that's a choice that only you can make. In some workplaces, it's a great idea. In other places, it might not be. But if you are going to open up about being autistic, and if you are going to specify how you work best and how you communicate best, try as far as you can to not be apologetic about it. I'm just remembering this job interview that I had where I've just launched Autistic Not Weird literally a few days before this interview. And yeah, my history of interviews is quite dire. And let's just say, I was a former primary school teacher, so mathematics degree, teaching degree. I'd been a teacher, and it took me 4 interviews to get a job doing the filing. I was about to say because I'm so bad at interviews, but no, it's because the recruitment system just isn't built for people like me. But there was
Mm-hmm.
this one day when I decided uh, at the end of the first question, when I just stumbled my way through it and coped so badly that I thought, well, you know what? If I do the same with this interview as I did with the previous 3 interviews, I've already lost this interview. So I might as well, just for the sake of experimenting, given that a few days ago I just told the internet I was autistic, I might as well just be honest and say, okay, I'm autistic and I have the perfect kind of brain for this job, except those skills do not really transfer to quick fire Q&A interviews. So if you see me kind of underperforming in the spoken word part of this interview, please don't see it as a reflection of how good or how bad I'd be at the job, because I have a bunch of strengths and a bunch of weaknesses. and the strengths that I have really would make me the perfect person for this role. And they admired my honesty and they gave me the job. Now, I could have said, by the way, I'm autistic, which means I can't do this, and I'm terrible at that, and I'm awful at that, but I promise I'd make a good employee, really. So I say, if you're going to talk about your autism, don't be apologetic about it, because, well, why should we need to apologize for our own neurology? I mean, uh, the majority of neurotypical people don't apologize for being neurotypical, and frankly, they shouldn't either. No one should. But um, uh, talk about it in terms of your strengths, not in a way that self-pathologizes.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like sometimes the only way out is through self-advocacy.
Mhm.
All right, a couple more questions. Like first, like something that we like to do at the Autistically Wired podcast is to have a section for our guests to talk about their special interests.
Mhm. Well,
I
what
know
might that
that
be?
you're well.
Yeah,
Rubik's cube is
just solved a 5 by 5 by 5 Rubik's cube as you said that sentence.
my goodness. I don't know how impressive it is, but I assume it's very because I can't do a 3 by 3.
Well, I know it sounds very predictable, but well, everything in life is difficult until you know how to do it, and then things become easy. It's like I bet the first time you learned the alphabet, you really struggled with it. That's not a reflection on your intelligence. It's just when we haven't done stuff before, it's difficult. But um, yeah, having an autistic brain may give me a bit of an advantage when it comes to puzzle solving and things, but you don't have to be autistic to be good at the Rubik's Cube. A lot of my friends are in the Rubik's Cube community, and I'd say about half the people there are autistic, but the other half are non-autistic. So it's
Like
uh,
they're the one with the disability.
well, um, I don't want to fall down another rabbit hole there, but it's. I do sometimes say if 98% of the world were autistic, guess who'd have the disorder? But I don't think it's particularly helpful to pathologize neurotypical people either. And I know it's a very trendy
Mm.
thing in autism circles to say, "Oh, it's the neurotypicals who got it wrong. They're the source of all the world's problems." But I'm just thinking of my neurotypical partner, my neurotypical mother, my neurotypical sister, and I, I just don't hate neurotypicals as much as a lot of the autistic community wants me to, and I make no apologies for that. But I digress. Going back to cubing, it's a place where, yeah, people are very accepting of you, pretty much whoever you are, because, well, the variety of neurodivergent people there, we've pretty much got inclusivity running through our bones. But
Mm.
yeah, that's one huge great thing about cubing is the community of well, nerds, autistic or otherwise, and uh, also just the challenge of trying to speed solve things as fast as you can. And yeah, plenty of, as I've said before, lots of lovely rabbit holes to fall down
Mm.
in a good way.
In a good way, certainly. I think last question before we let you go.
Uh-huh.
If there's one takeaway that you hope that listeners come away from this conversation with, what would that be?
Play to your strengths. Know what you're good at. Do what you're good at. Life is happy that way, and you are taking a sip of water. So thank you.
Drinking game. All right. Well, Chris Bonnello, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for having this
Yeah, likewise.
conversation with me, and best of luck with Underdogs and Autistic Not Weird and all of your other ventures.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me.